Oh, I think we should introduce ourselves first.
Yeah,
I'm Eliza Moss. I am a music education student. I am specializing in chorus and solo singing performance.
I'm Taylor Spears. I am pursuing both band and orchestra, so I'm kind of dabbling in a lot.
And I'm Cambria Whitehead, and I'm mainly focusing on bands.
And I'm Dr. Sullivan. I'm happy to be here. I'm a professor in music learning and teaching, and this is my 25th year at Arizona State University.
All right, wonderful. Well, then to start, Dr. Sullivan, would you mind telling us a little bit about like your history in teaching, like different places you've taught and different subjects you've taught?
Sure, I would enjoy sharing that with you. Um, I began teaching pretty early, probably like all of you in high school. I was asked to go down to the middle school and help teach some of the beginners. So that was really fun for me. And it was thrilling, to be back with little kids trying to make sounds on their instruments. So that was really my first experience of teaching groups of kids to play the clarinet, right, who were beginners. But fast forwarding to teaching in public schools, my first job was after my student teaching, and I taught in a rural school for one semester. Student taught in the fall, and then in the spring semester, I replaced somebody who was retiring, and that was really great to have get a job in the spring semester. It was a little odd, but it was kind of an unusual place for me. First of all, I was an out-of-state student teacher, and I was in Oklahoma. And this was a very rural school. I had to drive 50 miles one way to get there. And it was in a tiny town called Olive, 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 Oklahoma. And they needed a 1 through 12 music teacher. They only had one music teacher. All grades were like under one roof in one school. And that's where I started. And I taught general music, grades 1 through 6. I taught beginning, middle, junior high, and high school band and choir. And we had a jazz band, stuff like that. So that was my first job. I stayed there for that semester that I was hired. And then I looked for a job that was closer to my home. And I got hired back where I'd done my student teaching, which was in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And I was going to be the director of bands for Sequoia Middle School. And you think, how can you be a director of bands at a middle school, Dr. Sullivan? Well, because it was a huge middle school. I think there are 1,400 students in this middle school, and there are 450 kids in band. And I had the high school directors came down to help me in the afternoon, so I oversaw their work in my program, et cetera, et cetera. So I stayed there for 4 years, and then I went to teach collegiate. I went to get my PhD, actually, and so I ended up at the University of Iowa, and for my teaching assistantship, I taught conducting. And I taught beginning conducting for all musicians in the School of Music at the University of Iowa. And then I did all the supervision of student teachers, and I ran the student teaching seminar at the University of Iowa. And all of this is why I was a PhD student. And when I was finishing my dissertation, there was an opening for adjunct clarinet professor at a small private university near my home. Actually, it was a college. It was called Augustana College. And the person that was the head of the music department knew me. And he called and asked if I'd take the job. And I came and auditioned, and I got the job. And then I taught there while I was doing my assistantship at the University of Iowa, teaching music ed classes. And then after that, after I graduated from Iowa, I got my first college job, official college job at the University of Oklahoma. And I taught there for 2 years, and then the ASU job opened, and I knew that the professors had a national reputation there, and I thought that would be a good place for me to be and learn to become a professor. And I'd heard of Dr. Jerry Humphreys, and I had heard of Dr. Saunders Stauffer. And so I applied and I got the job. And so that's really my teaching background. I've taught in the summer at other universities, that sort of thing. But it's been a long time since I've been a public school hired teacher.
Wow.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. What do you think that some of the background in music, like teaching in a rural district, teaching at a public university, how do you think some of that has affected your students and your education?
Affected my students now?
Yes.
Let's see, that's a good question. I think I'll have to tell you my assistantship in conducting at the University of Iowa. I think that really gave me confidence. I mean, I was always a good conductor, and so that gave me confidence. And then I won the university teaching assistantship award for conducting. That gave me a lot of confidence, right? And so I think in like art of teaching classes, or even when I was at Augustana College, they asked me to conduct a second band sometimes. I think all of that makes me a better conducting professor when folks have to conduct in my art of teaching classes, right? Or my art of teaching beginning instrumentalist. So all of that background, and I used to teach the art of teaching secondary instruments. I did that for 20 years, I think, at ASU, about 20 years. And all that grade 5 literature, grade 4 literature, I was really confident with my conducting. And then one time I conducted on one of the ASU concerts, the wind ensemble, and I think that background of my previous experience teaching in the public schools, when I was teaching at the middle school, I often went to all the conducting workshops that were going on at universities. So I think all of that really helped me feel confident about teaching conducting to the undergraduate students, regardless of where I was. I also think my musicianship on my clarinet, being a clarinet professor, having degrees in clarinet, I think that makes my musicianship feel solid, right? And but I think all those education classes I had at the University of Iowa, I think outside of music, for me at Iowa, they were spectacular. And I think they really helped me have an understanding of the research and the psychology of music and the psychology in general, developmental psychology, motivational psychology, all of that really prepared me. And I think I bring that into my art of teaching class really well. Students have appreciated that in the past. So I also think just all those teaching of those 425 middle school band students from beginners, through 8th grade, that really comes, I still feel like that's really right at the forefront of my brain. And I bring those experiences and that thinking into the art of teaching class, especially teaching the instruments and the literature and that sort of thing. The classroom management was always a challenge with 100 students in a room at one time with, noisemakers. So I think all of that background at Sequoia Middle School and in Broken Arrow and working with the high school marching band, even though I was at the middle school, all of that is all part of what informs my thinking when I'm teaching the art of teaching class. Even though I'm not in the classroom anymore, I still channel that pretty well, I think, and have really distinct memories of all that teaching and those experiences.
Really awesome. So, speaking of having multiple ensembles, how do you approach being a lifelong learner? How do you inspire students to continue music afterwards, after high school or whatnot?
Yeah, I'm going to frame this. And immediately when you asked me that, I thought about my middle school students. Sorry, you all. I didn't think of all of you immediately as undergraduates. I thought about my philosophy in teaching middle school students. Cambria, that came up really quick in my mind. And I think it was always some cognitive dissonance for me when I was teaching public schools, because if it would have been up to me, we would have had chamber music recitals as our concerts, But I was always also preparing for these large group, festivals that you go to for evaluation, right? And so that became a really big focus. And there were a lot of incidental things that the administration wanted the band area to do out in public, because Broken Arrow has such a huge band program and they fund it really well. So when they want us to march in the Veterans Day Parade, or they want us to march in the Rooster Day Parade, or whatever kind of thing they want us to do, we had to stop all of our curricular instruction, which for me, Cambria would have led more to the possibility of promoting lifelong musical engagement than marching in the Rooster Day Parade. I could be wrong, right? I don't know that definitively through a research study or anything, but I always wanted them to do things individually for their musicianship outside of playing in the whole band, so that someday they might have a shot of thinking, oh, I could do this on my own, or I could enjoy music on my own. I don't need, 12 other flute players surrounding me to make music, right? So I think, the curriculum sometimes can get in the way of the expectations of a district of really, getting students engaged in music that will be in a manner that would promote lifelong, maybe listening or participation.
Wonderful. So you mentioned your teaching experience with public schools. When you were starting teaching with public schools, what were some of the other challenges you experienced?
For me, the immediate challenge that comes up in my mind is classroom management. That was my struggle, because my classes were always so big. I had 50 heterogeneous, which means mixed instrumentation of beginners in my first hour class all by myself. So when you're teaching the trombones, what are the other 45 students doing in class, right? And you really have to learn to keep all the plates spinning and keep all the students engaged while you're working with that one flute player who can't produce a sound yet. I think that was new to me. And then all the other classes, my first hour and then my fourth hour classes were the biggest challenge. I mean, there were 100 eighth graders in this very small room. And, it was just hard to get them to settle in after lunch and then have a really quality rehearsal for 45 minutes. So I would say that. And then I remember the next fall. Yeah, I think it was the next fall, we had a guest speaker for the whole district, and his name was Dr. Wong, W-O-N-G, and he came from California, and he was really quite well known as an education professor, and his whole thing was classroom management. And I got his book, First Days of School, and I really followed it. And it really helped my classroom management the following years, because I had better thinking and structures. So I remember that being my challenge. It was never musicianship. I felt probably too cocky. I had a master's from Michigan. I had been the principal clarinet and everything at the University of Michigan, which was like one of the top music schools in the country. So my musicianship to me was on automatic pilot. I felt really confident about my ear and what I could hear in the ensemble and my conducting, like I said before, and playing a few secondary instruments, and etc. That wasn't an issue for me. I knew how to create really fine musicians. I just knew that would not be a problem. It was all the other stuff, the stuff they don't teach you, which might be really good that they don't, because you really want to focus on being a good musician when you're in the music school. But that you have to learn on the fly. And you have to make sure you get all your bus requests in, because wouldn't it be terrible if all the kids were ready at the contest and the bus didn't show up? All those kinds of things, right? You have to really figure out as a non-percussionist how to really keep those folks in the percussion section super organized. And you have to take control of that, right? And sign parts and rotate parts and that sort of thing. And then there's the whole thing about the beginners. I literally had every year between 225 and 250 beginners, and trying, to make a solid instrumentation so that you don't have a flute band, meaning that every kid wants to play flute. You can't do that. So that was a challenge too, learning the ways of asking students, what are your choices in playing, an instrument, so that we don't literally, if I were to send up 50 flutes to the high school who I'm feeding, I would get fired probably. So somehow learning how to create a balanced instrumentation for the beginners, right? And then the seventh graders really honing in on teaching them how to play their instruments really well and putting in chamber groups and all that kind of stuff. So you just have to learn how to manage a program. And often, in an undergraduate degree program, they're not going to tell you how to be a good manager. And you have to be super organized and, all the little tricks of running a program. So I think that was a challenge for me too. And thank God my musicianship was good so that I could focus on that other stuff.
Thank you so much. Could you possibly talk a little bit more about how you build your program up when you're just starting out, such as recruitment or even building relationships within your district?
Okay, well, help me remember, that's kind of a two-part question. First off of all, recruiting for your program at the beginning band level. I do a little unit in, it's not so little, I do a unit in the Art of Teaching Beginning Instrumentalists, where the undergraduate students make recruitment videos, and we watch them online, we discuss them. And so you have to actively go to the general music classes in the elementary schools. I was at a middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and we started band in 6th grade. So we recruited at the elementary schools. So we made a video. My first school, I was music. So sometimes I had to find clever ways of reaching out while I had classes, right? So I made it. At that time, I could go within the school and do my, recruitment stuff. But once I got to Broken Arrow, where there's many, 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 many elementary schools that feed the middle school, then you have to make some sort of effort to get down to the elementary schools to recruit students. So we go over that. I think that's really key. And then once I got to the 6th grade, because the band program in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma is so established, I never had to worry about not having children coming into band. So that wasn't a big thing. It was at my first rural school that I thought it was really great that I had 25 beginners in my beginning band. I was so happy with that. And then, think about that, the next year I had 425. And so that, if I would have stayed at that rural district, I'm sure I would have had to been very proactive, maybe giving a survey out to all the elementary kids, seeing who could play piano, who has any musical background, or just a survey of who can hear high and low and who can do a few things musically, and then heavily recruit them into the band program. But here's something really interesting to consider, and this doesn't necessarily hurt the elementary schools too much, but this is a piece of wisdom, I think, for all music teachers. Anytime a school announces that there's going to be a scheduling committee, somebody from the fine arts has to be on that committee, because often they'll put AP classes at the same time as a high school band or orchestra or something like that. And so your AP students, that's what happened to me at the rural school in Oklahoma. All the AP students left band. They dropped out of band. And I said, what happened? And they said they had to take like the advanced placement calculus or something like that. So I lost the really smart kiddos. So what if I would have been there to lobby and say, okay, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. We've got to figure out another solution. So I think that would be a really important piece that I'd want to share about the administrative aspects about managing any kind of fine arts program, whether it's a dance class or an art class or a choir program, string program. You've got to watch out to what administrators are doing with this schedule. And I guess that would be one of the most important things I would say, even though you're like a first year teacher when you go in the school and they say, who wants to be on the scheduling committee? You raise your hand, because you're going to watchdog to protect the fine arts classes in the high school or the middle school. You asked me a second part to that. What was the second part?
What values do you create a foundation in your classroom?
Oh, you mean when I was teaching public school or now at the undergraduate level?
Either way, what are some of the values in your personal or as an educator that you bring in?
First, let me think about at the middle school level. I think you really have to, you're part of a community now. And the community when you're in the public schools, you're part of a community now with a lot of stakeholders. And a stakeholder means somebody who's invested in your program in some way. So you got the principals, you've got the children, you've got the other district music programs, you've got the fine arts coordinator, and you've got all the parents. It's the parents. So for me, it was at the middle school level, I wanted to make sure that any new policy or anything like that when I started new in the school, it was really critical that you don't make any sudden changes. And you need to have a parent advisory board, a band parent organization, orchestra parent, whatever. Some districts have that where there's one music parent board. You need to be a part of that. And you need to get input from the parents before you change anything major that the community could love, right? And so I think that would be really important to be sensitive to all the stakeholders' needs. And I think you learn pretty quick. You know, for me, it was a really interesting lesson, which ended up shaping my approach to teaching all the middle school students. I go in, you know, and I'm thinking I'm this really fine musician going in, and I kind of have this ego, right? But you go in and then you realize right away, and I'm smiling, you can't see me right now, I'm smiling really big. You realize it's not all about the music and you know, all those high level achievements, you know, that you did in graduate school or whatever. And you realize, oh, it all starts from the children. And you have that, and you just, you know, they're just so funny too. And they come in, and the kids are interesting to observe, right? Regardless of if they're eighth graders or the sixth graders or the first graders. And you realize really quickly that it's not about you and your musicianship and that concerns level. You realize pretty quickly that it's all about the kids. And how do you get them from X to Z or whatever to be really fine musicians, or at least be able to tap the steady beat or play their lip slurs on their trumpet or whatever it is. And so you stop being the levels of concerns, as we talked about in class, start pivoting away from you. Am I good enough? Are they going to like me? Am I going to have good classroom management? And you start thinking, how is the best way to educate these students to do this, that, or the other objective you have in class? So I think so you learn that it's becomes about the students first. Somebody has a podcast out right now. I think it's David Duarte. He used to teach up in Deer Valley. I think he's now in Seattle or somewhere in the Northwest. And it's called Culture Before, I don't know what the other word is. And the point is culture before something. And it's about making sure that you have the right environment for the children in your classroom before they start making music, right? So I guess that's part of my philosophy, is thinking about the children and recognizing that you really need to meet their needs and meet them where they are, and that they bring their own knowledge about music in the class. And so you start thinking about that. I also think for the undergraduates, it's really important to model and give them space for socially constructing their knowledge, because we think we have all these things that we want the undergraduates to learn, like all of you. And but then I have to stop and say, oh, they bring in so much knowledge, so we need to always start from where the undergraduates are and sort of build out. So I think that it's called constructivism, and that's a thing. It's like a philosophical positioning, and that means helping the students construct their knowledge. And that's why I always have you guys at tables and talking, and that will be, is a familiar thing you have to do in all your art of teaching classes at ASU. Okay, I think that's enough.
Yeah, that was a really great response. Thank you so much.
Right. So since there's many new educators in the field, are there any resources or advice that you might want to give or recommend to beginning educators right now?
For like resources?
Yeah, like anything that you've come across during your entire career that you might want to share.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I'd always pop into the giamusic.com and see what they're selling. I think it's a great website. It has a lot of great music education stuff, and I think they always have the best educators writing for them, and usually college professors that have the theory background and the teaching experience, right? So I would recommend sources like that. I think these people coming out with podcasts now are really interesting, and I would say, try to find some. Of course, there's going to be really interesting videos on YouTube. So I guess the big point, Cambria, is that so different than when I was teaching. Um, the world of learning is at your fingertips on the web, right? And what an amazing resource. And I would highly encourage everyone to remember that. And it's great to have people and everybody needs to have a mentor, of course, right? I had great mentors throughout my career, student teaching, first year of teaching. Even today, I have mentors who have just retired as professors from all over the country. And some of my former college professors. I still, if I have a question, I look to them. I think it's important to have mentors as well. But I would say use the web, listen to anytime you want to play a certain piece and you choose the literature, go hear 3 or 4, middle school choirs sing it. And what kind of problems are they having with that piece when they're singing it? And then you have to think, do I really want to do that? Because my tenor section isn't that strong and they're having problems with this choir on the, I would say use the resources of YouTube and other websites to listen to music, find music. And then there are all kinds of those blogs, like the band director's Facebook page, choir director's Facebook page. I would totally get on those now if I were a brand new middle school band teacher, and I would be not afraid to ask questions, not worry ever about anybody thinking, oh, this is dumb. They're going to think I'm dumb if I don't know the answer to this. No way. They're going to think, wow, look how eager this person is to learn. So I would use all these resources on the web to make a stronger connection of improving my own teaching. So I think that would be the advice I would give. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. Switching gears for a moment, when you were talking about teaching different grade levels, but also different areas of music, like general music, band, and choir, how did you learn to start teaching different ensembles, particularly ones that weren't already in your area of expertise? Like you mentioned, being a clarinetist, so band might have been more in your comfort zone than starting with new programs.
What a great question. I've thought about that. I thought about that when I took that job in rural Oklahoma, and all of a sudden I'm teaching general music and I'm teaching choir. Okay, the band stuff wasn't going to be a problem at all. I felt really good about that. What was going to be an issue was general music. I'm having a deja vu moment, like I've told you this before. What I did was I had to be resourceful. All of us are smart. We're all college educated, right? We're smart. And you just have to find a way to be resourceful. And in this music room that we had, there were general music textbooks. I don't know how old they were. I don't know anything, but I know Basel series. And that means those are series of general music books that were published for first graders, second graders, third graders. And when you open, and so developmentally appropriate for those age levels, right? And so when you open those books for children, you look through all the wonderful lessons in there. Why wouldn't you use those? And I'm a good musician and, you know, I have a master's degree at that point. Surely I can open up these general music books for first graders and figure out how to teach the lesson from what's already written in this book. So I just used resources that I knew were quality resources that other general music teachers were using around the country to inform how I was going to approach working with these little kids. I think the interesting part, so again, the music part wasn't going to be that intimidating for me at the general music. What was a little intimidating for me was I wasn't used to general music age children. So when the general music students came into my class in a perfect line with a line leader, right? And they were so cute. They're like first grade. They come up to you like your knees or maybe your hip. And they're sweet and they're cute. But I wasn't used to all the little kids wanting to touch me. And it might sound really weird to you, but they want to hug you and they're so happy to see you. And then what if they have to go to the bathroom? I mean, there were all these like little kid things that I don't have younger siblings. I'm the youngest, right? And I babysat as a young woman, but yeah, so it was just when you have like 15 first graders come in, you better be ready for that. And they would come in so perfectly behaved with their general music teacher. And, you know, I wasn't really prepared how to corral them, you know, like sit them down perfectly and get them to engage in the lesson. I remember just telling you this right now makes me sweat. And I remember thinking, you know, here I am the adult and here come all these little kids. I'd rather it would be the, you know, the high school choir. Okay, so I knew what I was going to teach them, but to get them engaged and settled down, because I fell into the trap where every little kid wants to say something in class. And it's really sweet, you all. They, you know, they just want to raise their hand randomly and tell you, my dog died. They just say stuff like that. And, you know, what do you do with that to keep the class moving on? Because you have an empathetic response and then all the other kids get engaged in that and then the whole class has gone south, right? Stuff like that. I wasn't prepared for because I hadn't read Dr. Wong's book yet at that point. But the hardest part was the choir. That was really intimidating because it was the high school choir, but it was the most interesting juxtaposition of classes back to back. So the first graders would leave and with the teacher and who had set up the perfect line leader and the perfect line, and they knew how to do all that, the little kids. And then the next class was high school choir. And like, I think all the basketball team was in the choir. It was so funny to see the little 2 feet tall children leave the room and the 6'4" men and young women come into the room. That was really, really an interesting and gear switching as a teacher. All of a sudden now I'm in high school. Okay, so my piano skills weren't great. I mean, I did all the things I had to do to pass group piano as, you know, an undergraduate. And, so what am I going to do about accompanying? Luckily, literally on the campus of the school, or seemingly right on the campus, but right next door was a Baptist church. And so somebody said, oh yeah, Mrs. So-and-so, the pianist for the church, will come in if you ask her and she'll play piano during your choir rehearsals. And I thought, well, that's a gift from God. And of course, I'm being a little silly because that's, you know, it's a pun because, and she did it for free. And so that really, really helped me, right? And then I wasn't prepared for the really good singers in the choir who were going to need help with languages, German and French and diction. I knew what I didn't know, put it that way. And so we ended up singing a lot of popular music, and the people in the audience, and I had to prepare them for a concert in front of people for choir. The people in the audience loved it. And so they were perfectly fine that they weren't singing, you know, the Messiah or something real, some big choral music. They loved that they were singing popular music. And it really sort of saved me. And the students really engaged in that switch. And so I thought that was interesting. I still remember today, and that was so long ago. I remember the parents that came up to me and said, "How did you get the young men to sing like that? We've been coming to these choir concerts and you never hear the men singing." And they were really singing out at your concert. And I thought, well, it's probably because they love popular music, right? It's their music. So anyway, so that was hard. And that's the switch I made. And everybody didn't seem to mind that they weren't singing something by Mozart or an opera something or other at the concert, which I was my concept, or something by Rutgers or something. That was my concept of choral music. And they were just thrilled that they were singing popular music because what? They were singing. And so that was, they weren't mumbling or anything like that. So it all worked out, and I'm a good musician, so I would have been able to hear if they're out of tune or if the harmonies were poor and that sort of thing. And I was pretty good at sight singing and all of that throughout all my college years. And I like to sing, I just don't have a trained voice, right? So we were sort of all learning together. And you know what? They were just so happy to have a music teacher. And at small schools, I should tell you, and those rural areas, I think the principal had told me that every year they had a new music teacher for like the past 10 or 12 years. How sad is that? The kids really want to bond with the music teacher, right? So they were just thrilled that they had a music teacher who was invested in teaching them music. So yeah, there are lots, I have lots and lots of good stories in my classroom evaluations from the undergraduates in the art of teaching. The students often say, "Dr. Sullivan has some really great stories that help us understand the importance of such and such, And so it's because I really remember everything. It feels still very fresh in my mind because it was hard work and it was really effective work. And it changes you for your life working with these people. Okay, I think I'm talking too much.
No, that was a great response. Thank you so much for sharing. Could you talk a little bit more about how you encourage lifelong musicianship in your students? For example, I know that even at a high school level, there's students just beginning or even in youth orchestras. So how do you encourage both ends of the spectrum?
Well, the first thing I thought of when you asked that question right now was, boy, I sure would use peer mentors. That would be the first thing, with the different levels of people. I mean, I have an example of this. It's not that it was really effective. That's not at the high school level. It's at a community band level. When I was at the University of Oklahoma, I started something called the New Horizons Band. And we had people who were 50 years and older who, hadn't played for a long time and wanted to be in the band. It was called New Horizons Band. It was started out at Eastman School of Music, and it was a wave of things that we had one at the University of Iowa, and I helped work with that group as a graduate student. And so I started one at the University of Oklahoma, and we had different levels. So I believe what I'm going to tell you would be applicable to high school or any group. At Iowa, we put them all together, the beginners with the people who had experience. I didn't do that initially at the University of Oklahoma. We had sort of two levels of players, and I had pull-out lessons, and all the pull-out lessons, like all the clarinets together, like sectionals for the beginners. I had all my undergraduate students teach them. So they would teach the seniors. And let's get a perspective on this, on the age. Maybe, I'm not sure, what age your parents are. I don't have a perspective of that anymore. But 50-year-olds are people who are 10 years younger than me. Okay? And so they're still really young and vital people. I don't want you to think that they're like 90 and, decrepit. There were people, really elderly is what I meant to say. There were people coming in walkers, but there were also people coming in who just finished being a lawyer all day. And, so-and-so had been a dentist all day, right? And they're coming because they had high school band or college band, and they want to play their instrument together. And they want to be with their peers who were in that age group. Really, the age group was probably 50 to 85. That was the age group in my band. And the ones who were pure beginners, and there were a lot who wanted to to learn to play instruments. And I'll never forget the attorney who came, and he showed up one day, and he, like maybe our second week, and he had a brand new tuba. Tubas are really expensive, y'all. He had a brand new tuba, and I said, "Oh, Rodney, where did you get the tuba?" And he said, "Oh, I got it from some website in China, and I just bought it." So older people have money, right? And so they would just buy things that they needed and bring them. I don't know. I don't remember if his tuba was of good quality, but it sure looked nice because it was brand new, right? Things like that are interesting, but they were all at different levels. So I had the undergraduates start them. They had like an art of teaching beginning instrumentalist with me, and then I had them work with, we put the New Horizons Band at the same time as that class. So they would pull out the seniors and work with them starting on these instruments. So what the challenge was when we put them all together, I had to have the people that had a lot of experience working and helping the ones that had less experience. And they loved it. It was like a big social hour for them. They loved it. And I'll have to tell you that, some of them had substantial playing experience in their life, and that's fascinating. But then they have their life. They become fathers, they become professionals, they become, they just have jobs and they have to raise their kids. So they stop playing their musical instruments because there's no longer a band to play with, right? And they don't have time to do this because they're raising kids. So when they come back and they're all at different levels, heck, they didn't care. They were just happy to be a group together. So what I would do is when they were all playing together, I changed the music, which meaning the kids the seniors that were the beginners, I would reduce their music. You know what I'm saying? Like they would play 2 half notes in this measure where all the other flutes or clarinets might have had 16th notes or something really challenging. And I kept the range, condensed so it was easy for them. They loved it. They loved being together, and they had beginning band and string books. And I know there's a New Horizons orchestra, I think somewhere up in Scottsdale, still exists today. And so I think you just find ways to make it work if you have different levels of people, and also have peer mentors, I think that's really important when 2 people work together, and then they have friendships too, right? That was my biggest strategy, I think, was just if they're playing literature that's difficult for some students, maybe it's the way I can go to Sibelius and I can reduce it and make it so they can play along and be happy that they're playing with the group, but it's not going to discourage them, right? So I think that's the biggest point there. And if you could do that, they can enjoy being there. I think the most important thing for any music program, strings, choir, anything, is chamber music, solo and ensemble. I come from that philosophy from my own high school years. And every year at solo and ensemble, everybody had to take a solo, and then I played in 4 other ensembles. Some of them I might have conducted, some of them I played in. That was a really big deal to go to solo and ensemble. And that was a big deal with my middle school students. I wanted them to be able to play one on a part successfully. And I was worried about the ones who, were getting kind of buried in their sections. So we had a chamber music night. And I think I always tell undergraduate students this, I don't think my principal ever got band until she heard, 3 7th or 8th grade clarinetists, maybe an oboist and the flute in there too, playing something that was by Beethoven and probably Mozart. And she heard them all on a separate part. And she realized, at that moment, she realized they're musicians. But when she hears them all together in a band, she never really got it. But when she heard them one on a part and could hear each child playing, she thought, oh my God, what have you created for these children, right? Their parents got to hear this. And that's when I got the most support, I thought, from my principal. It'd be like, what if everybody in English class was always writing their essays with 10 other people? So you really wouldn't understand Sally's contribution to that essay, right? And so that's kind of thing when you have a trumpet section or clarinet section, they're all playing together. So you don't really get that nuance of the individual. And so when you have them one-on-one playing music and they can stop and start together and without a conductor, that I'm telling you, my principal I think she cried when she heard some of them playing one on a part. She finally got it. Okay, that was a long answer. So I guess the point would be make sure you give them opportunities to learn how to play independently and not always just in the section, right? And then make sure you peer mentor and take the more stronger students and help pair them up. Don't always put them in chair order. Take the strong students and set them right in the middle of the third clarinet section, second, or put them right with the third trumpets or third trombones or whatever, so that they have somebody to listen to help them. And I think that's motivating for everyone, the people teaching them and the students trying to get better, especially if they're younger students like freshmen.
Yes, I fully agree. Some of my very first teaching experiences were with leadership and peer mentoring, so that definitely gave me the passion. Thank you so much for your response. I think that's all the questions we have, so thank you so much for meeting with us.
Hey, you guys, thank you so much.